Thanks for coming back for the second section of our conversation around advancing DEI and measuring the success of DEI at your credit union. We're going to continue now with some more basics in DEI and the integration of DEI at credit unions. We're going to start with a quick history lesson. In 2010, Congress passed legislation as part of Dodd-Frank that encouraged financial institutions to conduct self-assessment of diversity and inclusion practices and policies related to the workforce. These weren't regulations or guidance attached to them, just kind of encouragement for what credit unions should do about DEI. In follow-up, the 6 agencies that oversee financial regulation got together to establish some joint standards for diversity and inclusion. The NCUA now uses these 5 standards as the framework for their diversity self-assessment. This helps us to understand more about how financial institutions might approach DEI from the perspective of a workplace. I think they're a good starting point, but just that, a starting point. Nonetheless, let's review these 5 standards and give consideration to how they might fit at your credit union. The 5 standards include leadership and organizational commitment to diversity and inclusion, proactive implementation of employment practices that expand outreach efforts to diverse individuals, consideration of supplier diversity, promotion of transparency of the diversity and inclusion practices, and then finally, the 5th standard is monitoring and assessing diversity practices and policies. In the next few slides, we're going to step through some of the points you might use to take the pulse on how you stand today as far as these NCUA standards for diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization. I encourage you to take out a notepad right now and self-evaluate along with me as we move through this. First up, Standard 1, leadership and organizational commitment to diversity and inclusion. In this case, you'll see that 61% of respondents responded favorably to this section. Self-reflect for a moment and consider if you have acted in these areas, if you plan to, or if these elements are currently in progress. The 6 items in this area, as you can see from the slide, include a written DEI policy that's been approved by senior leadership, including the board of directors. Whether or not your credit union has a senior level expert in DEI on staff to oversee DEI. Is your credit union providing regular education and training on equal employment opportunity and DEI actions? Does your credit union use diversity recruiting practices for employees and incorporate these in strategic plans? Are you practicing diversity recruiting for your board of directors? Finally, related to your leadership and organizational commitment to diversity and inclusion, are you reporting on DEI efforts to the board and the executive team on at least a quarterly basis? The second standard, proactive implementation of employment practices that expand outreach efforts to diverse individuals. Again, a majority of credit unions responding have taken steps to implement employment practices demonstrating a commitment to DEI, with 56% of respondents being affirmative in this area. These 9 steps related to employment practices that might help you understand how to self-assess in this area include implementing equal employment opportunities for employees and applicants, conducting targeted outreach to minority, women, and other diverse applicants to get them in the candidate pools, conducting targeted outreach to schools that serve diverse student populations. So, for example, historically Black colleges and universities or women's colleges. Are you participating in events to recruit diverse candidate pools? Do you use specialized media for diversity recruiting techniques? Are you partnering with professional organizations who serve diverse populations? So, for example, a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce would be a professional organization that serves a diverse population. Are you regularly evaluating your DEI programs and planning future improvements? Do you use data to track workforce diversity and your inclusive employment practices? And finally, are you holding management accountable for DEI integration with business strategies? The third area that the NUA set forth as a standard relates to supplier diversity in both procurement and business practices. This area remains one of credit unions' greatest opportunities, with only 11% of responding credit unions having implemented a supplier diversity program. Supplier diversity can be considered by, first of all, just writing a supplier diversity policy, making sure that leadership supports the incorporation of supplier diversity with business cycle, creating a policy that mandates soliciting bids from specified percentage of diverse businesses, intentionally informing diversely owned businesses of contracting opportunities, again, using data to track diversity spend and diversity owned businesses considered in procurement, implementing practices to promote diverse supplier pools, and finally, tracking and encouraging subcontracting with diversity suppliers. The fourth standard that the NCUA has set forth relates to promotion of transparency of diversity and inclusion practices. Fewer than 1 out of 4 respondents are committed to transparency in their DEI practices. And this is a little bit concerning. Transparency matters for more than just tooting your own horn. An Arizant diversity study from 2022 primarily looked at industries such as banking, accounting, wealth management, and insurance. And it found that more than 50% of employees believe their companies are not transparent about goals, plans, and outcomes related to DEI, even when their companies are clear about policies. If your company makes a statement of commitment to something and does not back that statement up with goals, plans, desired outcomes, and accountability metrics, how much do people believe that commitment? That's why I think this promotion of transparency is important. So in consideration of that, are you doing these 5 things? Periodically publishing information about your DEI practices, making DEI strategic plans public, including your commitments to DEI, publicizing opportunities to promote diversity hiring and contracting, publicizing opportunities to develop and mentor employees, publicizing opportunities to help develop and grow potential contractors. Finally, the 5th standard, monitoring and assessment of diversity policy and practices. In this case, what we're asking is, are you continuing to conduct annual self-assessment of your policies and practices? Do you modify those policies and practices based on that annual self-assessment? Are you reporting your self-assessment to the NCUA's Office of Minority and Women Inclusion in a voluntary capacity? And finally, are you publicizing the information from the self-assessment? I hope as we step through this section, you spent a little time in self-reflection, and maybe you started to categorize what you've done, what you have not done, and what you might plan to do. Where did you stand? Are you working toward fulfilling each area of the NCUA's best practices? In a time of reflection right now, consider, what is one area where your credit union has demonstrated great progress? What is one area where your credit union has the most room for improvement? This wraps up our second segment. We're going to come back in the next segment and talk more about how your credit union can level up your DEI stuff. For now, thank you for staying part of this, and I look forward to talking with you again really soon.